Alright, so Euphoria Season 3 Episode 1 has been released on HBO Max, and we are here today to do our review, our recap, and our breakdown for this episode. We're going to go over all the important events that happened. I'm going to give my opinion on them, and then I'm going to let you know my rating at the very end for this episode, okay? So, first things first, this episode is titled Andale. And if you want to watch me react to the first 5 minutes of episode 1, make sure you go do that in the video we posted a couple days ago where we reacted and discussed the first 5 minutes. But without further ado, let's get into the breakdown. Let's go. So first things first, we see Rue making her way to Mexico. We see her staying with this Christian family after she crosses the border. She seems to like it there very much. She seems envious over their lifestyle and their way of life, which, by the way, this is all taking place after a huge time skip, years after high school for our main characters. And this episode sort of serves as a recap episode as to what is happening inside of all of their lives since this time skip has happened, and we're pretty much catching up with all of our characters here. So in a way, this almost hardly didn't even feel like an episode for a lot of different reasons, but at the same time, I do think there was some good stuff here and there was some terrible stuff here too. But we're going to get into all of that. So we pick back up with Rue. She's taking her bus back to California, back to the United States. And that is when we get the backstory about what happened to her. So apparently she was working at a smoke shop and she ended up getting found by Elordi, which is the drug dealer that she used to work for in season 2, throughout season 2. And that is when Rue is forced to become this drug mule. We get this disgusting scene, one of the worst scenes in the entire series, in the entire show, definitely in this entire episode, of Rue, and she recruits Faye, by the way, being forced to swallow these balloons full of drugs, where if they pop inside you while you're transporting them inside of your body, inside of your vessel, you're essentially just going to drop dead, which we see happen throughout this episode. So this is just the most sickening, like, fetish-sized, disgusting content I've ever seen. Not sure why this was included inside of this episode. Sam Levinson, what do you have going on? We need to check into you, okay? We need to do the background check on Sam Levinson, because why are you forcing these actors to participate in this disgusting scene? Okay, now we move over to Faye, the friend that was recruited by Rue to help with the swallowing of the drug balloons and the drug transportation, etc., etc., telling Rue about her boyfriend who keeps this safe. I think that's going to come into play later in this season. It doesn't inside this episode, so we'll move on to Rue visiting Lexi inside of LA. This is where we pick up with her character. We get to see what's been going on with Lexi. She's been working in Hollywood. She's been working under some top director or producer, whatever you'd like to call it. She is one of their assistants, but working in the field, in the business, getting closer to her goals and her dreams, which I really relate with. You know, I really like the Lexi character. I like what she's pursuing. It kind of mirrors me, I feel like, in some sort of way. So that was nice there to see what is going on with the Lexi character. And this is where we also hear about Fezco's character getting apparently locked up for 30 years. Now, of course, we know that the real actor did pass away, so this was their way of writing him out of the show. RIP to Angus Cloud. Now we pick up with Cassie in the most insane transition ever. And what they have Sydney Sweeney doing here, I don't know why she signs on to these roles to participate in this type of tomfoolery, okay? Because this was another absolutely insane scene where we have to question what is going on in the writer room, what is going on with the director and the creator of this series. But we see Cassie doing essentially this dog fetish stuff. Again, a lot of like fetish content throughout this episode, very weird. But she's trying to become some type of influencer through dressing up like a dog, getting on her knees, getting walked on a leash, etc., etc. Very weird content here. But let's be honest, it's kind of on brand for this character. Okay, and Sydney Sweeney is just being absolutely degraded throughout this entire scene and kind of this entire episode. Get to learn about Nate. They seem to be in some sort of wedding arrangement, right? They're engaged, they're prepping for a wedding, which we'll talk about more later on in this episode. But we find out he picked up his dad's business. He is now the owner of his dad's business, so they're living large, okay? They seem to be living on some mansion. They have a housemaid. They're living a very good life, and still it's not enough for Cassie, this entitled little whatever you want to call her, okay? Which, by the way, apparently the actor for Nate's father passed away also, so a lot of loss of life over the years as we headed into season 3. Rest in peace to that man too. Now we pick back up with Maddie's character. She's working in management, sort of close to Lexi, in proximity to Lexi, because she is managing the actors that are participating on Lexi's sets, or the sets that Lexi happens to be working around. So she seems to be living a somewhat good life. We don't get to see Jules inside of this episode. We do get word during the whole Maddie and Lexi scene that apparently Jules is a sugar baby, is what they call her. Okay, she's getting paid money to do God knows what. Again, we don't see this character inside this episode. I'm sure we will in the next coming episodes. Now we pick back up in the diner with Rue meeting with Muhammad, is I believe his name, and he's trying to help her get closer to God. She's curious about God. She's curious about the Bible. She wants to learn more about religion. She has all of these questions about the faith, as anyone would, but Muhammad seems to be giving her good advice and trying to guide her in the right direction, because Lord knows that she absolutely needs it. Now we pick back up in an underground pill lab where they're making these pressed fentanyl pills. We have Rue going to drop off these pills to someone named Alamo Brown to his compound. She happens to have to use the bathroom there, so as she goes off to use the bathroom, she wanders through this compound, and this is where I think we get some of the most interesting content in the entire episode, which, by the way, Rue is an amazing character. Zendaya is doing a great job with this character, with this role. And as she was on the way to this compound, we got this Western score playing again. We are going to talk about the soundtrack later because that was a big issue throughout this episode. But we move over into Cassie wanting to join OF so she can pay for these $50,000 floral arrangements for her wedding. This crazy bitch says she does not want to have a ghetto wedding. You know, if she doesn't have her $50,000 flowers, even though Nate is spending, I'm sure, $100,000 or more, way more, on this wedding, if she can't have her 50K flowers, she doesn't want to have a wedding at all. So this character is extremely delusional. Nate doesn't like this idea, but at the same time, he knows he's not in a position to pay $50,000 for some damn flowers. So it's understandable that he's like, hey, just do what you gotta do. Okay, if you really want these flowers that bad, do what you gotta do. Why he's still marrying this girl, I have no idea. Maybe because she does whatever he says. I don't know. Okay, now let's move on. By the way, Sydney Sweeney does do a great job inside of this scene at looking genuinely psychotic. Like when you look into her eyes, this looks like an absolute psychopath. And I did like that part of her performance throughout this particular scene. I do think she did a good job with that. Now the show takes a hard transition into this woman overdosing on the ground. It is a terrifying scene. Okay, at the Alamo Brown compound. Of course, Rue gets blamed for this. So as she's partying, having a great time, you know, having a heart-to-heart with Alamo Brown, it is brought to their attention that someone overdosed. So of course, she gets blamed for it because she was the mule that brought the drugs there to the compound. You know, they're asking if it's a setup, if Elordi tried to set them up. She's trying to have a heart-to-heart with him, tell him, hey, I believe in God. I think God brought us together. I would rather work with you and not Elordi. She has me doing terrible things. He goes, okay, you believe in God? All right. You know, you want to work with me? Okay, let's go out here real quick. Puts an apple on top of her head, and then does this shootout scene where whether she lives or dies in this scene depends on if he hits this apple off of her head, which apparently Alamo Brown has a very good aim. So he does hit the apple. Rue is extremely ecstatic. You know, I've never seen her this happy in the entire show. She's so glad to still be alive, which was amazing to see. And we get a little Marshawn Lynch cameo at this point of the episode. And that's pretty much the episode right there. So it was extremely messed up. Extremely fucked up episode, but at the same time, outside of like the extreme fetishized, you know, moments and scenes throughout this episode, I actually liked it. I liked what we're doing with Rue's character. I think that was the most interesting part of the episode. Again, it hardly felt like an episode. It was more like a, okay, let's catch up with all of these characters that we used to know and love and see what they're doing now in their day and age. The show feels extremely different because of the lack of Labyrinth's composer ability. Of course, we have Hans Zimmer now. Hans Zimmer's great, but when we're missing that trippy aesthetic that Labyrinth brought to the show, when we're missing, you know, the lights, the flashing lights, the different colors, the dark rooms, everything that we used to love about this series, all of that is just missing here. So in a way, this feels like a different show. It doesn't really feel like Euphoria. You know, it feels like something else entirely almost. So I can see a huge part of the fan base just hating this episode in this season in general because it is going to feel different. But like I said, I do like some of the content that we got here. I do want to see what's in store for us in the next episode, because while most of this episode was a catching up, the ending was actually very good. I liked what we got in the ending. I thought it was compelling, thought it was interesting, and it did make me want to see what's going to happen next come episode 2, and you know, so on and so forth with the episodes throughout season 3. And the last point I want to make, this show felt a lot like The Idol. If you watched HBO Max's series The Idol with The Weeknd and whoever else was in that series, Johnny Depp's daughter was in that series, that is what this kind of felt like in a weird way, which I did cover that show extensively on the channel as it was airing back then. Couple years ago, 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago now, 2023, right? I did episode reactions and reviews for every single episode there. That did pretty good on the channel back then, so you can go check that out if you're interested in Idol whatsoever for whatever reason. But as far as season 3 episode 1 of Euphoria, if I had to rate this episode, I would give it a 7 out of 10. It gets the 7 out of 10. Again, not too bad. I thought it was a bit average or maybe slightly above average in terms of the content we got. I think they could do a lot of good things here in this season. It doesn't have to be a complete train wreck, which it sadly does look like we're headed in that direction, but it doesn't have to be that. There is somewhat good content here, and if they push more in that direction as to Alamo Brown and Rue and what's going on with these whole, you know, drug cartels and Lori getting her get back at Alamo Brown for whatever reason, that type of stuff could be interesting. The Cassie stuff's not that compelling. The Nate stuff's not that compelling. What's going on with Lexi's a little interesting to me. With Maddie, we didn't really get much there. She seems to be, you know, having a good job, but at the same time struggling a bit financially. And yeah, so those were my thoughts on episode 1 titled Andale. I'm curious to know your thoughts on this episode down in the comment section down below. If you don't know what we do here on Demigod ENT, we do film, TV, and pop culture based content. So if you're interested in this type of content in the right place, hit subscribe, hit the like button if you enjoyed this video. I'll catch you in the next one, guys. Peace.